OTAs are in the books for the Seahawks, which means it's time for a bonus mailbag episode here on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Happy Father's Day to all of our listeners out there. And as always, thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. In this case, 6 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. OTAs and the offseason program as a whole are in the books for the Seahawks. And as we do each and every year, it's time for a bonus Q&A episode coming out of the offseason, going into the summer break. Training camp 6 weeks away for the Seahawks and the rest of the NFL. I'll be tackling as many questions as I can here on today's show from our valued YouTube subscribers. So without further ado, let's get to it. Our first question here on our Q&A coming from Max Stubb. Hi, Corbin. Do you think it's possible that the Seahawks stick to the idea of establishing a rotation at the right guard position like they did last year, this time with Haynes and Bradford? Excellent question, Max. I'm not going to say that it's impossible because I don't normally, for the Seahawks, they're willing to go against the grain a little bit, and they're willing to do things a little differently than other teams. They showed that last year. But Phil Haynes does not have the chronic knee issue that Gabe Jackson was dealing with last year. And I think that was one of the big reasons Seattle did that rotation. They were just trying to get Gabe Jackson through the entire season. And they also wanted to get a look at Phil Haynes. I can't see in this instance with Haynes and Bradford, two younger players, I can't see them doing that. I think that Andy Dickerson and Pete Carroll, they're going to want to find a clear-cut starter at that position in week one, and they're going to move forward with that player. Now, if Phil Haynes wins the job and by middle of the season he's struggling, they could easily shift their attention over to Anthony Bradford or vice versa. If Bradford wins the job out of the gate and then struggles against NFL competition, Seattle could make a change at some point during the season. But I can't see them playing musical chairs because, quite frankly, that is not something that we see often with NFL teams and offensive linemen. You want the continuity aspect in the trenches. And last year, the Seahawks had a rare situation where Gabe Jackson and Phil Haynes, those two could coexist, rotating, and it ended up working out for them fairly well. But I don't see the Seahawks doing that again this season. Really good question here coming from Roger Van Oosten. I'm enjoying your 90-man roster discussions. The Hawks seem to do better with undrafted free agents than other teams. Is that true? And do the Hawks have a safety rotation in the future with Jarek Reed, Joey Blunt, and Sutherland, or just special teamers only? So I'll get to the first part of this question. As far as undrafted free agent success, as Rob likes to say on our show, the proof is in the pudding. The Seahawks have had as much success as any team in the league under Pete Carroll and John Schneider finding undrafted gems, whether we're talking about Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse, or we're talking more recently about Poona Ford, Brian Monet, Brock Coyle in the mid-2010s, a player that started some games as a rookie coming undrafted out of Montana. So Seattle has been able to year in, year out find quality undrafted players that are able to step in and contribute. They have found quality starters in the undrafted ranks as well. There are a few other teams out there that have been pretty successful. New England has got a long track record under Bill Belichick of finding good undrafted players. And the New Orleans Saints had a run, including Marquez Colston, where they were bringing in guys that were late round picks or undrafted players that they were able to groom into stars. And so there are other teams in the league that are good at finding undrafted players, but the Seahawks have certainly been in that top three, if not the best in the last decade or so at finding undrafted players that come in and not only contribute right away, but they are long-term contributors, multiple seasons playing key roles for the Seahawks. As far as the second part of that question, I think it's a little bit premature to say that the Seahawks are going to have their secondary of the future with a sixth-round pick and two undrafted players. And that's what they would be having with Jarek Reed, their sixth-round pick out of New Mexico this year. And then last year, Joey Blunt making the team as an undrafted rookie out of Virginia. And Jonathan Sutherland, an undrafted rookie signed this year out of Penn State. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I could certainly see a situation or a scenario play out where one or two of those players is going to start for the Seahawks at some point. Quandre Diggs is not getting any younger. Next year will be the final year of the 3-year extension he signed before last season. So maybe Jared Reed is waiting in the wings to replace him. We'll see. Quandre Diggs is still a very good player. He might have another contract in him with the Seahawks. With Jamal Adams' injury history and the durability concerns there, maybe a player like Sutherland can end up stepping into that role as a Ryan Neal type player. He's been impressive in their offseason program and gotten some first team reps with Adams still recovering from the torn quad tendon. And as far as Joey Blunt's concerned, he would also be in consideration for that free safety spot, and maybe Jared Reed plays some in the slot. So I can see all three of those players, to a lesser extent Sutherland, because he's an undrafted player. We got to see how he handles training camp and exhibition games before we get ahead of ourselves. But I could see Reed or Blunt potentially down the road being guys that can step in. But right now, those three players, they're going to be at best probably special teams players right now, and I can't envision without injuries that any of them are going to be playing significant snaps on defense as long as the Seahawks have their star safeties and Julian Love, who they just added free agency, all healthy. Next question here coming from Jabriel Slater. Is Zach C supposed to fill the dual running back formation that Penny and Walker did a few times last season? So I could envision a scenario where the Seattle Seahawks run some 2 running back sets where both these players are on the field because they are different style runners. And Charbonnet, I think, has a little more blocking prowess than what Ken Walker III does. That being said, I don't see this being a situation. Chris Carson, a few years ago, they played him some snaps at fullback where they did some quick handoffs, and maybe Charbonnet can handle that. But I don't know necessarily that we're going to see a lot of 2-back sets in general. That's just not the way that Sean McVay's operated with the Rams, and Waldron runs a fairly similar offense. Not a lot of 2-back looks. They did put Derek Young back there some last year. So I think this is going to be more of a rotation ordeal for the Seattle Seahawks to worry about in the backfield rather than getting them both on the field at the same time. But there may be some ways that they are going to be able to do that. And particularly when they're looking at the short yardage situations, again, you could play Charbonnet at the fullback spot there. You can do some mixing and matching in terms of how you utilize those players. Maybe Charbonnet goes out into the flats and catches some passes. In short yardage situations, Ken Walker III, you can do some pitches to him off of fake handoffs and fullback. There's a lot of different stuff that you can do schematically with both of those players being in the lineup together, but it also takes one of your receivers or one of your tight ends off the field as well. And with the talent the Seahawks have at those spots, you have to figure they're going to want to maximize how many snaps that they have Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf on the field together, or get D. Eskridge or Derek Young mixed in there, and the 3 tight ends they've got. It's a good problem to have. I just can't see a lot of situations where they're going to be putting both of those running backs together because, quite frankly, I don't see a lot of scenarios playing out where they're going to be playing many 2-back formations to begin with. For those of you that are listening, make sure in the live chat on YouTube, this is for our subscribers on YouTube exclusively today on this Q&A. Make sure that you are submitting your questions in the chat. I'll try to tackle as many of them as I can. We did get this question from Dorian on Twitter, so I'm going to mix in some Twitter questions as well. And Dorian said, you guys talked about Jamal Adams as a comeback player of the year candidate. Don't you think that Damar Hamlin already has that in the bag? I think that's a good question because obviously Damar Hamlin, we're talking very rare circumstances here. A player that had to have CPR done, had to be resuscitated multiple times on the field. The fact that he is going to be able to play again is remarkable. And probably he is going to be your favorite to win comeback player of the year, assuming that he's able to go through with this and he's able to return to game action. You would think that he would be the favorite there. But I think, when you're looking at players in comeback player of the year, there's going to be a lot more candidates this season with players like Jamal Adams that missed so many games last year. I still think production has to be weighed into this, even with the great story that is Damar Hamlin. And Hamlin's a pretty good player. If he returns to form and plays the way he did for the Buffalo Bills before that scary injury last year in Cincinnati, then I would think that he is going to be the favorite. He's going to win that award, but I wouldn't just say that it's his award already. I mean, you still got to go out and you got to play. And Jamal Adams has had multiple injuries the last couple of years. So he's certainly a player that's going to be in the mix there in terms of coming back for adversity. And he may have a better chance than Damar Hamlin to be able to put up crazy numbers for the Seahawks, assuming that he can stay healthy and curb the injury bug that's been biting him the last couple of years. this presents a real opportunity for Jamal Adams to be able to get those big numbers in the tackles and sacks if they're going to blitz him more, tackles for loss. We'll see what they end up doing with him schematically, especially with Julian Love now being in the mix. He's got to get back healthy first. But I think that it's a little bit early here in June to be saying that Damar Hamlin's already got this award in the bag. If he goes out and has a solid season coming back from the circumstances that he dealt with, the adversity he dealt with, then I would think he's going to win that award. But I certainly think Jamal Adams is in that small list going into the year that you've got to have a tag on saying that guy's got an opportunity to potentially win this award. This bonus episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs, putting it simply, make you look and feel good. You won't want to take them off. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dogs shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. Unlike regular shorts, Bird Dogs aren't made of a stiff, restricting cotton, keeping you comfortable year-round. Take my word for it, whether I'm heading on a road game to cover the Seahawks or chilling at my house preparing for a podcast, I'm always sporting Bird Dog shorts and joggers because they are extremely comfortable, don't restrict movement while keeping a slim look, and the sweat-wicking fabric keeps me cool and dry all day long, no matter the elements. I can't recommend Bird Dogs enough. You'll want to wear them all day, every day. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. You're listening to a bonus episode of Locked On Seahawks, and happy Father's Day to all of you that are tuning into the show. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12, especially on a holiday like today. If you are listening in and you're submitting questions, greatly appreciated as always. So let's continue tackling post-OTA questions here for the Seahawks, NFL, whatever else that you've got. Make sure to submit them in the live chat here on YouTube, and I'll tackle as many of them as I can. This one coming here from Jason Honnert. Can't wait for the Seahawks to beat the Bengals in the Super Bowl next February. Any good linebackers in the draft next year? So I'm just going to be brutally honest here with you, Jason, and the rest of our listeners. I couldn't tell you very many of the linebackers that are in the 2024 NFL draft class because we haven't even started the season yet in college football. And I'm typically paying pretty close attention on Saturdays. And if you want to watch the MAC on Thursday nights, I love MACtion being from the Midwest, but that's when I really start to put things together since, I'm not an NFL scout. I don't work for the Seahawks or another team. I'm not watching film in June of college players that are going to be in the 2024 draft. So I honestly, I can't tell you too much about the linebackers in this year's class because we haven't played any of the games yet. And I'll start paying some really close attention once we get to the start of the regular season in college football. I start to put together my list. That's what I've done the last several years. And then by the time we get to the end of college football season, the NFL playoffs wrap up and we start fast forwarding to the draft, I will have a extensive notebook, every position group. But unfortunately right now, that's not one that I feel like I can really answer because I haven't had a chance to watch any of these players on film yet. But certainly I will say this, from what I've seen, the crop of players that's coming out this year, I expect it's going to be a little better overall group at linebacker. I don't know if you're going to have too many Jack Campbell type players, but I think you'll have more players that are mid-round talents. I'll have more opportunities to figure that out as we go, though. Let's get this question here coming from Nate. Any good defensive tackles to look at, or who's been a standout player at that position so far? Perhaps the rookie the Seahawks got. Maybe the Hawks bring back Shelby Harris. So as far as defensive tackles on the free agent market are concerned, I have made this argument on our podcast a couple of times. Last week, made a spirited argument that to me it would be the ultimate cherry on top for this offseason for the Seahawks if they were able to bring back Shelby Harris, because he has played nose tackle. He has extensive experience playing in the Vic Fangio 3-4 style defense. He is very popular in the locker room as a leader. He's a guy that is going to hold his teammates accountable, and players are going to feed off the energy that he brings. There's so many different reasons why the Seahawks just don't have any money to work with right now. They haven't even signed Devin Witherspoon to his rookie deal yet. That is going to get done here in the next few weeks, I believe. But without that deal being done and without doing restructures, they just don't have the money to go out and sign somebody. So going back to the other part of this question, as far as who is impressed, I didn't get to watch any of the mandatory minicamp practices in person, but the practices this offseason that I have been at, I've talked about Jonah Tavai quite a bit. I'm just really excited about his potential. And I know that he is a player that has 29-inch arms. That's a huge knock on defensive linemen, short arms like that. He is only 283 pounds. He's 5'10", and this guy's not built like a prototypical defensive tackle, let alone a nose tackle, which they have listed him as. But I also know that sometimes you just got to throw that stuff out the window and just look at who the football player is. And Jonah Tavai had almost 30 tackles for loss and 20 sacks the last 2 years at San Diego State. This guy is a really fun football player that's got a quick first step that wasn't necessarily shown in his pro day workout, but on film you can see it. He's got that explosive first step, the penetrating ability on the defensive line, really lightning quick hands that allow him to mitigate the fact that he's got 29-inch arms and he plays with a relentless motor. There's a lot to like about this kid, and I think Cameron Young is also a player that playing in a system where he's not going to be asked to slant all the time, that is going to help him quite a bit. I think where he is really allowed to power step and he's able to use his strength, not necessarily have to worry about trying to slant. And that took him out of a lot of situations where he could have made plays at Mississippi State. So I think this is a kid that's going to help open things up for the linebackers. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be ready to be a day one starter, but he's a guy that can certainly jump in and play significant snaps for the Seahawks. If they can get Brian Monet back healthy early in the season, that's going to be huge for them. But I still say, if you're going to add to this group, Shelby Harris, bring him back. He's still a free agent. Go out and get him. Find a way to open up some money so you can bring Shelby Harris back. And I think that would really round out this defensive line that they have made some good additions to. There just still are a lot of question marks there. Question here from Henry Mars. Would you trade one of our excess cornerbacks for a quality nose tackle? The Panthers have many on the roster and they need cornerback help. So I don't know that the Panthers necessarily need cornerback help. Have you seen some of the players they've got over there, including J.C. Horn? Now, if Horn's banged up again, maybe that changes things. But there are some teams out there that may be willing to shop a nose tackle. And we've seen the Seahawks do this in the past where they've been able to swap a player near the bottom of their roster for a player near the bottom of another player's roster. That's how they got Justin Coleman originally from the New England Patriots. And he had a couple really nice seasons at slot corner. So I think we have to see how training camp and the preseason plays out before we really look at a question like this. I don't think the Seahawks right now are trying to trade Mike Jackson or Trey Brown. They're not actively out there working the phones trying to move one of those guys. They like the fact that they have multiple guys that can start at both cornerback positions on the outside, and they have some players that have the flexibility to play in the slot too. That is a good problem to have. If they get to the tail end of training camp and they're getting close to the end of the preseason and it's clear Devin Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen, they're ready to be your starters in week one, and Trey Brown and Mike Jackson are several rungs below them, and there's other teams that call about them, I'm sure John Schneider at that point will be willing to listen, especially if nose tackle continues to loom as a major issue on that front line. Maybe they can find a trade partner that can give them an experienced nose to bring into the fold to go with Cameron Young, and maybe a player like a Jonah Tavai can still make the roster as a situational pass rushing nose tackle. Seattle finds ways to make guys with unique traits like that work, so we'll just have to wait and see. This is truly one of those situations we got to see what happens on the practice field and how playing in preseason games goes before we can really answer whether the Seahawks are going to try to move one of these guys. Question from What the Smell? Well, I don't know. I can't smell. Anyway, if we had to hire a coach from within to replace Pete Carroll right now, who are you choosing and why? Well, I hope that we don't have to go down this road because I think Pete Carroll proved last year that he is still one of the very best coaches in the NFL. But if we were in a situation, I'm going to switch this question around a little bit. Let's just say that we're in a situation that the Seahawks are ready to replace Pete Carroll, and we're basing it off of the staff they have right now. Of the coaches on their staff, I think that you would have to strongly consider that you would probably move Clint Hurt up to that position. And I know that some are going to say, but he hasn't proven anything yet as the defensive coordinator. I'm looking from a standpoint of who I think can come in and carry over some of the stuff that's happened in Seattle. And I think Clint Hurt is a guy that's been with this organization for quite some time. He has credit of the players. He's beloved in the locker room. And he's done a good job with their defensive line. Mostly was working with the interior defensive linemen. He has a lot of the qualities you're looking for. And I think if the Seahawks defense makes a bit of a leap this year, as many are expecting, he is going to be a head coaching candidate in waiting for other teams. So I think teams are going to be looking at him. Maybe Shane Waldron plays his way into this discussion, but you got to have multiple seasons where your offense is in the top 10 in scoring. And we saw what happened in 2021. They had the injury to Russell Wilson. That team just wasn't as explosive in his first year as the play caller. Can he take this group to another level? Because if he does, offensive coaches still are the ones that teams have preferred to hire as head coaches. He's going to be a hot commodity too. So I think you could make arguments for both of those players, but I had to go with a coach on this staff. It would probably go Clint Hurtt, Shane Waldron, and then I would put Carl Scott as third there. I'm impressed by him, everything that I've heard from him when we talked to him after practices and the way that he's handled that secondary in his brief time with the Seahawks. He is a player, he is a coach that I would keep a close eye on, that maybe down the road is going to be potentially somebody that's a defensive coordinator and then gets looks as head coach. It'd be a little early to go that road, but I'd say Clint Hurtt probably of those three if you were going to go with internal candidates to replace him. And looking at our questions here, let's go to the Twitter realm here. This question coming from Jason: why have the Seahawks not signed Devin Witherspoon yet? And I just talked about this moments ago that I expect this is going to get done, but this is one of those situations where, just to provide some clarity, players do not have the ability now to alter the salary that they're going to be paid out. And I had to make that clear with Derek Hall's situation a few weeks ago, that he's still getting the same salary. It is slotted. But what teams and players have the ability to negotiate, and get the agents in there as well, they can negotiate signing bonus payouts. They can do negotiations with contract offsets. Those are things that are going on behind the scenes. Devin Witherspoon is going to sign with the Seahawks. This is inevitable. He is not going to go into training camp without signing his contract, but there are these little intricacies that need to be addressed. And with the high top 5, top 10 picks, you typically have a little bit more that you got to work through when it comes to signing bonus payouts and the contract offsets and things of that nature. So they don't have a rush. There's different waivers that they can sign to allow him to be on the field in the offseason. You get him out there for the start of training camp. I fully anticipate that he's going to have his contract signed well before that. At minimum, it's going to get signed before they're on the field, the day or two beforehand. He's going to get that contract signed. So fans don't have anything to worry about. This is not going to be a Jamarcus Russell type situation. Guys don't hold out anymore with the new CBA and slotted contracts. He can't hold out for more money because there is a certain value that is placed on that draft slot. So it's going to happen. I know some fans are frustrated about it, but it's right now just something that isn't being rushed on, and they're going to get it done before training camp starts. Another question from Nate: since the Hawks look like a high-powered offense with Njigba as a third wide receiver, do you think that they would use Fant as trade bait? What can the Hawks do to get money? Maybe sign Uchenna? Who else can they extend? So Fant, I think if they were going to make that move, it would have happened before the draft. He's on his 5th-year option. I don't see them trading away one of their tight ends now at this point, because if they would have moved him, then they could have drafted from this really good tight end class. They didn't do that. So I don't think they're going to be moving Fant. That would open up a little bit of cap space, maybe to go out and get a veteran defensive tackle. Uchenna Nwosu being extended is still the move that I think makes the most sense. And you could maybe put Fant in that discussion too. If you think he's part of your long-term future, extending him is going to open up a little bit of money if you set that up properly. But I think Nwosu is the player, being only 26. The numbers he put up last year, he had 5 sacks and a bunch of pressures the year before with the Chargers. So he has gradually been getting better each and every season he's been in the NFL. He's still in his prime, a really young player that seems to fit this defense really well. The coaching staff loves him. He can play the run and he can rush the passer. That is the player that I think, even only 1 year into the 2-year contract he signed, that I would have been working diligently. How can we get you locked up long-term? And that would create some of that financial flexibility the Seahawks need. But that would be the player that jumps out the most. He and Fant are probably the two real extension candidates. You still could look into some other restructures, but that would go to Quandre Diggs or Jamal Adams most likely. And making a move with one of those guys, you could do it with Will Dissly too if you wanted to, but you're kicking cap hits down the road, and then you've got even tougher decisions that you have to make with those players that already have big cap hits next season. They've already done with Tyler Lockett. I can't envision John Schneider doing that. So I feel like this is an extended player or trade a player type situation. And I just can't see them trading any of those guys right now. So Uchenna Nwosu getting an extension, to me, that's the most practical way that they can open up cap space and be able to use that extra money to go out and bring back somebody like Shelby Harris, or if there's another veteran they want to sign in the free agent market, you can create some flexibility. I still think that's the best way to do it. That also helps you long-term by locking up one of your foundational players. Last question here, coming from Henry Mars. Would you say that this roster is ready for a Super Bowl run in the next 1 to 3 years, or would you need to wait how this season plays out? We are deep, we are motivated, we have a mixture of experience and youth. So you just made some arguments why this team could be ready for a Super Bowl. And I've talked about this ad nauseum throughout the past month. I think that the upside is here for the Seahawks in the wide open NFC. You've got the Eagles and you got the 49ers. And I feel like after those two teams, that there's room for a team like the Seahawks to take that next step. And maybe they catch the 49ers in the NFC West. I feel like a lot of things are going to have to go their way. And that defensive line is going to be, it's going to have to be a lot better than most people expect it's going to be with the moves they've made. Everything's going to have to come together. Your defense is going to have to be much better. I'm just not sure that I'm ready to ascend them to that true contender area just yet. I still think the Eagles and 49ers have better rosters overall. But I do feel like Seattle is trending in the right direction. I like what they've done overall this offseason, bringing in guys like Draymond Jones. I like the draft class a lot, even if I would have maybe drafted a defensive tackle earlier than what they did. For the most part, I really liked the value they got throughout the draft. I think they got a lot of guys that can contribute early. You've got some really fun players on offense. You added Jackson Smith and Jigba to that group. So I feel like the pieces are in place that maybe in 2024, that's really when we see things click. Can they get a little bit more financial flexibility to add another piece or two in free agency and really put this team over the top? Then you're going to have your 2022 class in year 3. That's when they really should be clicking on all cylinders. And then this group, you're hoping this current draft class, year 2, they're going to be able to take a leap with some of the other players they have. I think 2024 is the best window for them to compete for a Super Bowl. I'm not saying it can't happen this year, but I feel like there's still a few steps away. And then I think the window opens for the next few years when you're going to have all these young players on rookie contracts, and you're going to have players like your DK Metcalfs of the world that are in the prime of their careers. That, to me, sets up favorably 2024 being the sweet spot for them to compete for a Super Bowl. There's still a lot of things that have to happen, though. We'll see what things look like this year. We might have this discussion this time next year and feel like, yeah, they actually were further away than we thought, or maybe they get to the Super Bowl like Athlon Sports picks, and at that point, we can look back and say, hey, they were ready to make that jump. But we got to see how this rookie class looks and how the rest of these pieces they've added on the defensive line come together before we can really make any hypotheticals as far as what this football team is going to be able to do in terms of pushing for a deep playoff run and advancing to the Super Bowl. As always, thanks to all the 12s for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. I'll be back with Rob Rang tomorrow. We're going to be breaking down what looks to be a spicy slot corner competition that's brewing, and we'll continue our 90-player countdown as well. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for all your great questions. Go Hawks.